Have you ever wondered why things are named the way they are? Like trees, flowers, fish. Why fish is called a fish and not a flower? Why it couldn't be like that? Have you ever questioned how and why there are names of each particular things we see? Does their name came naturally or did someone name them? All these questions are related to our topic for today. We're going to discuss structural literary criticism or the structuralism. I am Heronnisah Sabdullah. This is Literary Criticism, Lesson 8, Structural Literary Criticism. Let's start with our learning outcomes. At the end of the lesson, the students can A. Identify the proponent of the theory, B. Explain the concept of structural literary theory, and C. Critique the literary work using structuralism. This lesson discusses structural literary theory. Structuralism enjoyed popularity in the 1950s and 1960s in both European and American literary theory and criticism. Structuralism focuses on a literature as a system of science in which meaning is constructed within a context. Cultural communities determines the meanings and relationships of science. Criticism that uses a structuralist approach analyzes patterns, narrative operations, and/or codes of operation to interpret the text and the culture from which it emerges, exploring underlying structures that make the creation of meaning possible. The proponent of this theory is a Swiss linguist, Ferdinand de Saussure, 1857 to 1913. Saussure was born in Geneva into a family of well-known scientists. He studied Sanskrit and comparative linguistics in Geneva, Paris, and Leipzig, where he fell in with the circle of young scholars known as neo-grammarians. In 1878, at the age of 21, Saussure published a long and precocious paper called Note of a Primitive System of Indo-European Vowels. He explained in greater and clearer detail than others who were coming to similar conclusion how the PIA or Pi upload system worked. In linguistics, Saussure's focus on the synchronic dimension and own language as an interrelated system of elements was maintained through the American structuralist period, Bloomfield and Hackett, and also the generative period by Chomsky and Breslin. The structuralism. Saussure introduced structuralism in linguistics, marking a revolutionary break in the study of language, which had till then been historical and philological. In his course in General Linguistics 1916, Saussure saw language as a system of science constructed by convention. It is the thought that meanings of things is relational and that one particular thing is related to another thing, and that meaning was produced by interaction of various signifiers and signified. It is to say that we cannot fully understand the meaning of a particular thing without relating it to another. For instance, we cannot fully understand the meaning or concept of a leaf, dahon in Filipino, without having a knowledge of where it came from, which is maybe from a tree or any other plants. We can study the larger aspect of that thing in order to fully understand the meaning and purpose of that particular thing. For instance, the leaf. Structuralism challenged the belief that a work of literature reflected a given reality. Instead, a text was constituted of linguistic conventions and situated among other texts. Structuralism regarded language as a close, stable system, and by the late 1960s, it had given way to post-structuralism. Language is a system or structure, our perception of reality, and hence the ways we respond to it are dictated or constructed by the structure of the language we speak. So this theory assumes that literature as an artifact of culture is modeled on where the emphasis is on how a text means instead of the what of the American criticism, new criticism. The structuralists argue that the structure of language produces reality and meaning is no longer determined by the individual but by the system which governs the individual, which means that structuralisms aim to identify the general principle of literary structure and not to provide interpretation of individual texts. Meaning to say that in structuralism, we give criticism to the structure of a whole literary piece and not on every word in a literary piece. The structuralist approach to literature assumes three dimensions in the individual literary text. The first one, the text has a particular system or structure itself, or that language has structure. And under this dimension is design, which is composed of signifier and signified. Second, texts are unavoidably influenced by other texts in terms of both their formal and conceptual, or that a language is relational, that a concept cannot be analyzed without being compared to others. It tends to compare one piece to another in order to look at a varying system or structure that underlies them. 3. The third one, structures part of the meaning of any text depend on its intertextual relationship with other texts. That text is related to the culture as a whole. So that language as constitutive, or that language constitutes or create the world we live in under this idea is the codes and convention that can be found in the culture or in the literary text. By looking in the genre, one can easily understand why an occurrence of such event takes place. For instance, we know that this event takes place in a story because of such genre. If the genre is romance, then maybe there's love in it. For further understanding, let's go back to the sign. Sign is the smallest unit of meaning and is composed of signifier and signified. Signifier is the word itself or the sound we utter, and the signified is the mental concept which produced out of the word or the sound we utter or heard. So, for instance, when we utter tree, that word itself becomes the signifier, and when we think of the concept or the structure or think of the tree itself, we come to think that it is a tall plant with leaves in it, and that becomes the signifier. And then the relationship of signifier and the signified determines the meaning of the sign we are talking about. Now that we already use it in things around us, try to use structuralism in a literary piece. And this has been Heronnisah Sabdullah. Have a great day, everyone.